I'm Lily Jenkins, and at 32, I thought I had finally secured the life I dreamed of. Married to Ethan Hayes, heir to one of Charlotte's most powerful families, with a seat at their elite marketing firm, but appearances can be deceiving. At last year's 4th of July family barbecue, I brought the biggest business win the company had ever seen. I also brought my grandmother's homemade peach pie. They served store-bought pastries, and gave my husband the credit for my work. Then his sister raised her glass and said, "If Lily disappeared tomorrow, would anyone even notice?" Everyone laughed, including Ethan. That night, something inside me broke, and something stronger woke up. 3 months later, I disappeared for real, and none of them saw it coming. Before I share how I rebuilt everything they tried to erase, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever been made to feel invisible in your own story, hit like and subscribe, because this one's for you. All right, let's rewind. 8 years ago, when I first met Ethan Hayes at a charity gala benefiting the Charlotte Hope Foundation, I honestly believed I'd found my fairy tale. I was Lily Jenkins back then, a fresh marketing graduate from a modest background in rural Tennessee. I'd worked 3 jobs through college, scraping every penny together to earn my degree. Ethan, on the other hand, was everything I wasn't. Undeniably handsome, impeccably dressed, effortlessly successful, and from a family that was, for all intents and purposes, Charlotte royalty. The Hayes family, old money, impeccable social connections, a sprawling estate in the most exclusive part of town. He literally bumped into me at the champagne bar, spilling my drink. His apology was immediate, his blue eyes crinkling with what seemed like genuine remorse. "I'm so incredibly sorry," he'd said, pulling out a crisp linen handkerchief. "Please, let me get you another." We spent the rest of the evening talking. He seemed utterly captivated by my story, my childhood summers on my grandfather's farm, the hustle of putting myself through college. He kept saying I was refreshingly real, so different from the women he usually encountered, who, he claimed, only cared about his family name or wealth. The irony of that statement, in hindsight, is almost comical. We were swept up in a whirlwind romance. Dinners at exclusive restaurants, weekend getaways, flowers delivered to my tiny apartment almost daily. Every moment felt lifted from a romantic comedy. Within 6 months, we were engaged. And that's when I was formally introduced to the full splendor and subtle chill of my new family. Richard Hayes, my father-in-law, was a retired judge, a towering figure who still commanded immense respect and wielded considerable influence in local politics. His handshake was firm, almost bruising, but his eyes, a steely gray, never quite softened when they met mine. They seemed to assess, to weigh, to find me lacking. Then there was Eleanor, my mother-in-law, the quintessential Southern socialite. Her silver hair was always perfectly coiffed, not a strand out of place. She played tennis twice a week and hosted luncheons that were legendary for their understated elegance. Her smile, however, was a perfectly practiced social construct. It never quite reached her eyes when directed at me. At our engagement dinner, she'd offered a tight, polite smile and said, "We're just so pleased Ethan finally settled down," drawing out the word finally, as if I were the last eligible bachelorette left in Charlotte, a last-ditch effort for her precious son. I remember being subtly maneuvered out of the family photos that night. "Oh, let's get one with just the Hayes, darling," Eleanor had purred, gently pushing me aside. "You understand, for the family album." I did understand. I understood perfectly. And then there was Victoria, Ethan's younger sister. She was undeniably beautiful, with the same sandy blonde hair and patrician nose as Ethan. Her laugh was light, almost musical, like wind chimes. But there was always a calculating edge in her gaze when she looked at me, something that made me feel scrutinized, and inevitably found wanting. "Welcome to the family," she'd said, air kissing near my cheeks, her voice dripping with an almost theatrical sweetness. "We'll have to work on your wardrobe, dear." It was a casual comment, but it landed like a slap. I spent years trying to fit into their world. You know how it is when you desperately want to belong. You bend, you twist, you reshape yourself until you're almost unrecognizable. I straightened my naturally curly hair because Eleanor once casually remarked it looked unprofessional. I took tennis lessons, even though I secretly loathed the sport, enduring endless hours of drills under the scorching Carolina sun, all to join Eleanor on the court. I meticulously studied the intricacies of their formal dinners, memorizing which fork to use for each course and the names of all their country club friends. I even started softening my Tennessee accent, adopting the gentler, refined Charlotte drawl that characterized the Hayes family's speech patterns. I tried so hard, shedding pieces of myself, hoping that each sacrifice would make me more palatable, more acceptable. Ethan and I both worked at Hayes Marketing, the family company that Richard had founded before his legal career. Ethan was being groomed to take over as CEO, the clear heir apparent. I, on the other hand, had worked my way up to an executive level on my own merit, or so I believed at the time. I was good at my job, instinctively understanding clients' needs and crafting campaigns that delivered results. I thought my work would speak for itself, that my contributions would earn me a place, not just at the family table, but as a respected professional. The annual 4th of July barbecue at the Hayes estate was more than just a party. It was a carefully orchestrated social event, a public display of the family's prominence to Charlotte's elite. White tents adorned manicured lawns, catering staff moved with crisp efficiency in their uniforms, and a fireworks display reportedly cost more than my first car. It was less a casual get-together and more a performance. This year's barbecue is especially important, Ethan had told me on the way to his parents' home. Dad's invited Senator Thompson and his wife. I remember feeling a flutter of excitement, not just about the senator, but because I had news of my own. I have news too, I said, unable to keep the eagerness from my voice. The Kaido Systems account is confirmed. We're officially going international. I'd spent 6 grueling months courting Kaido Systems, a Japanese tech giant looking to expand their American presence. Landing them as a client would transform Hayes Marketing from a regional powerhouse into a global player. I'd prepared presentations, worked late with Japanese translators, even learned basic business Japanese phrases to impress them. The contract had been signed just yesterday. It was my biggest professional achievement to date, a testament to my dedication and skill. Ethan, however, barely registered it. "That's great, honey," he said distractedly, checking his phone. "Listen, Victoria's bringing her new boyfriend today. Dad's skeptical, so try to make him feel welcome, okay?" I swallowed my disappointment. My career-defining moment was secondary to Victoria's latest romantic entanglement. Still, I nodded and smiled. That's what I always did with the Hayes family. Nod, smile, and try harder to belong. What I didn't know then was that this barbecue wouldn't be just another exercise in familial disappointment. It would be the day everything changed. The day I finally saw the truth about my place in the Hayes family. I wasn't just an outsider. I was invisible, by design. The Hayes estate that 4th of July looked like a postcard from a Southern Living magazine. Red, white, and blue bunting draped elegantly from the columned porch. Staff in coordinating outfits circulated with trays of mint juleps and artisanal appetizers that were decidedly not traditional barbecue fare. A string quartet played patriotic melodies near the rose garden, while the actual grilling happened out of sight, handled by a chef from a 5-star downtown restaurant. I'd spent the morning baking my grandmother's peach pie from scratch. It was the one family recipe I truly treasured, a connection to my roots. I thought naively that it might finally impress Eleanor, who, despite having a full household staff, fancied herself something of a domestic goddess. "You brought dessert?" Eleanor's perfectly penciled eyebrows arched when I presented the pie. "Oh, honey, we have a patisserie handling the dessert table, but we can put this somewhere." She handed the pie to a passing server without another word, her gaze already drifting past me. I smoothed down my new navy designer dress, a number that had cost a month's personal spending budget, and tried not to let my disappointment show. Ethan had already disappeared to greet Senator Thompson, leaving me to fend for myself. Richard Hayes held court near the bar, his imposing figure still fit and straight despite being in his 70s. "Lily," he acknowledged when I approached, his voice a deep rumble. "Is Ethan with you?" "He's speaking with Senator Thompson," I replied. "Good, good," he nodded, then turned back to continue his conversation with the bank president beside him, effectively dismissing me. I spotted Mark, Ethan's older brother, and his wife, Clara, near the pool. Of all the Hayes family, Clara was the most genuinely kind to me, perhaps because she, too, had married into the family. She wasn't from wealth either, though her background in art history and her natural grace made her transition appear seamless. "Lily, you look gorgeous," Clara hugged me warmly, her eyes full of genuine warmth. How are you holding up? These events always make me need an extra glass of champagne. I laughed, feeling some of the tension release. I'm okay, actually. I have some exciting news about work. Just then, Victoria's voice cut through our conversation as she approached, a tall man with a carefully groomed beard in tow. Clara, Lily, this is Preston. Preston, my sister-in-law, and my brother's wife. I noticed the distinction immediately. Clara was identified as a sister-in-law, while I was merely my brother's wife. It was a subtle dig, but typical of Victoria's calculated approach. The afternoon progressed with the choreographed precision of all Hayes events. I circulated, made appropriate small talk, and kept looking for an opportunity to share my news about the Kaido Systems account. When lunch was served at the elegantly set tables on the lawn, I found myself seated at the far end of the family table, away from Ethan, who sat between his mother and the senator's wife. As dessert was being served, not my pie, but elaborate red, white, and blue pastries from the aforementioned patisserie, Richard stood to make his customary toast. He spoke about family legacy, American values, and then proudly announced that Hayes Marketing had secured a meeting with Kaido Systems next week. Ethan has been working tirelessly on this initiative to take our company international, Richard boomed, raising his glass to the future of Hayes Marketing. I froze, my champagne glass halfway to my lips. That was my account, my connection, my 6 months of grueling work. I looked at Ethan, expecting him to correct his father, to acknowledge my contribution, even a small one. He merely smiled, accepting the congratulations flowing his way, basking in the reflected glory of my achievement. When the toast opened to other family members, Victoria stood, her champagne flute held aloft, her expression mischievous. "I'd like to make a toast too," she announced, her voice carrying across the lawn. "To my wonderful brother Ethan, who proves every day that the Hayes drive for success lives on." She paused, her gaze finding me at the end of the table, and then, her voice light but her eyes sharp, she added, "And to Lily, who's always there, somewhere in the background." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the guests. "You know," Victoria continued, her tone light but her eyes sharp, "I realized something funny the other day. If you disappeared tomorrow, Lily, no one would even notice. You're basically just Ethan's shadow anyway." The laughter grew louder, more confident this time. I felt heat rise to my face as I looked around the table. Richard was chuckling, a low rumble in his chest. Eleanor was hiding a smile behind her linen napkin. Various family friends were openly laughing, enjoying the cruel spectacle. But it was Ethan's reaction that broke something inside me, my husband. The man who had pursued me relentlessly, who had promised to stand by me, who was supposed to be my partner. He was laughing too. He even reached over to pat Victoria's arm affectionately, as if to say, "Good one, sis, really nailed her." In that moment, surrounded by people I'd spent 7 years trying to impress, trying to belong with, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. I carefully set down my napkin, excused myself with a murmured apology that no one seemed to hear, and walked with measured steps toward the house. I made my way to the pristine guest bathroom, with its monogrammed hand towels and expensive scented soaps. I stared at my reflection in the ornate mirror. I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. She had the right clothes, the right hair, the right makeup to be a Hayes, but her eyes held a pain that couldn't be concealed by any designer dress or careful cosmetics. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. The worst part wasn't that Victoria had said it. The worst part was that she was right. Looking back, the warning signs had been there from the very beginning. Our third date was a dinner at Ethan's parents' home. Richard had asked about my family with thinly veiled condescension. "Jenkins? I don't believe I know any Jenkins in Charlotte society." "My parents still live in Tennessee, sir," I'd explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "Quaint," Eleanor had commented with a tight smile. After we married, Ethan and I moved into a house in an upscale neighborhood, a wedding gift from his parents. I tried to decorate it to reflect both our tastes, but gradually my contributions disappeared. My grandmother's handmade quilt was relegated to a guest room closet. The pottery I'd collected from local artists mysteriously broke, or was replaced with Eleanor's selections from designer showrooms. At Hayes Marketing, where I'd been hired based on my impressive portfolio and prior success, I found myself consistently sidelined. In meetings, my ideas would be dismissed out of hand, only to be repeated by Ethan later, at which point they would suddenly become brilliant innovations. I was assigned the accounts no one else wanted, the ones that were deemed too difficult or too unprofitable, yet I was somehow expected to produce miraculous results. I brought in the Westbrook Corporation account after their previous agency dropped the ball, a $1 million client that significantly boosted the company's annual revenue. Yet at the year-end party, Ethan was given sole credit for saving the Westbrook relationship. I had a recurring nightmare during those years. In it, I would be standing in the middle of the Hayes living room during a family gathering. I would speak, but no sound would come out. I would wave my arms, desperate for attention, but no one would look my way. Then slowly, my body would start to fade, becoming transparent until I disappeared completely. The Hayes family would continue their conversation, their laughter echoing, never noticing I was gone. I tried so hard to win them over. I volunteered for Eleanor's charity committees, spending countless weekends at silent auctions and benefit luncheons. I attended every boring legal dinner with Richard, listening attentively to the same stories about his famous cases, feigning interest. I even tried to bond with Victoria, inviting her for shopping trips and spa days, which she usually rescheduled or canceled at the last minute with flimsy excuses. There were so many small humiliations, incidents that seemed minor in isolation but formed a devastating pattern when viewed together. The time Eleanor served shellfish at a family dinner despite my severe allergy being well documented. "Oh, I completely forgot, darling," she'd exclaimed, as I felt my throat begin to tighten, gasping for air. "Ethan, didn't you remind me?" He hadn't, or the countless times Richard called me Olivia at family gatherings, the name of Ethan's college girlfriend. "Sorry, Lily," he'd correct himself without real contrition. "You remind me of her sometimes." And the 4th of July barbecue wasn't the first time Victoria had made me the butt of her jokes. There was the Christmas party where she'd given me a book titled Social Graces for the Unrefined as my gift exchange present. "I thought you could use it, dear," she'd said while everyone tittered. Or the Easter brunch where she loudly wondered if my fashion sense was intentionally retro or just hopelessly outdated. What made the barbecue different, though, was the absolute clarity it brought me. Sitting in that pristine bathroom, staring at a woman I barely recognized, I finally understood that the joke about my disappearance wasn't just a one-off cruel comment. It was the articulation of how they had always seen me, as inconsequential, as dispensable, as invisible. I had spent 7 years of marriage and countless hours of effort trying to become the person they would accept. I had dimmed my own light, altered my appearance, changed my speech patterns, abandoned my interests, and sublimated my professional accomplishments, all to fit into their world. And still, I remained invisible. Worse than invisible, I was a punchline. As I sat there in that perfect bathroom, with its monogrammed towels and family crest subtly embossed on the wallpaper, something shifted inside me. The hurt, that deep, throbbing ache of betrayal, began to harden into something else, something colder, more resolute. If they thought I was invisible, perhaps that was an advantage they had given me without realizing it. People don't guard their secrets from someone they don't see. I didn't confront Ethan about the barbecue incident. I didn't mention Victoria's cruel joke or his laughter. What would be the point? He would deny the malice, minimize my feelings, or worst of all, suggest I was overreacting or too sensitive. Instead, I retreated into myself, creating an invisible wall between us that he, predictably, didn't notice. The weeks following the 4th of July barbecue, I developed profound insomnia. I would lie awake beside my sleeping husband, replaying years of subtle humiliations, the dismissive comments, the casual disregard, and wondering how I had allowed myself to become so utterly diminished. During the day, I moved through my routine like a ghost, present but not really there. I spoke less in meetings, declined social invitations with the Hayes family, and spent more time alone. Ethan, meanwhile, was consumed with the Kaito Systems account, my account. He was flying to Tokyo the following month for meetings he hadn't prepared for and didn't understand the nuances of. When I offered my notes, my research, my carefully crafted presentations, he waved them away. "I've got this handled, Lil," he said distractedly. "The international expansion is my project now. Dad wants me to focus on it exclusively." It happened on a Tuesday, just 3 weeks after the barbecue. Ethan had forgotten his tablet at home, and his assistant Sarah called to ask if I could email some urgent files from it for a critical meeting. I knew his password, or thought I did, but it didn't work. After several attempts, I tried a different one. A flicker of an old memory, something Victoria had said once. I tried Victoria's birthday. The tablet unlocked. My breath hitched. Victoria's birthday. Not ours, not a family anniversary. His sister's birthday. The first crack in my carefully constructed reality. I found the files Sarah needed and was about to email them when a notification popped up. It was an email from Victoria with the subject line, Lily problem. My finger hovered over the notification for just a second before I tapped it. The email opened to reveal a thread between Ethan and his sister dating back months. My hands began to shake as I read, from Ethan Hayes to Victoria Hayes. Subject, Lily problem. Vic, Dad's right. We need to minimize her involvement with Kaido. She's getting too much direct contact with them. I've redirected their latest communications to come through me. Can you make sure she's assigned to the Sterling Holdings account revision? That should keep her busy while we finalize Tokyo. E from Victoria Hayes to Ethan Hayes. Subject, Lily problem. Already on it. I told Sterling they needed a complete rebrand ASAP, super urgent. That should keep your little wife occupied while the adults handle Kaito. She actually believes she brought them in, hilarious. Dad says once the international division is established, we can review her position, maybe a lateral move to HR, less damage she can do there. V from Ethan Hayes to Victoria Hayes. Subject, Lily problem perfect. She's been asking about coming to Tokyo. Obviously, that's not happening. I'm thinking of telling her we need to postpone starting a family until after the expansion. That should keep her focused on our future, while we sort out her professional one. The email thread continued. Dozens of exchanges between my husband and his sister, all centered around how to manage me, sideline me, and ultimately remove me from meaningful work at the company I had helped build. My hands were ice cold. As I set down the tablet, I felt physically ill. But then, something inside me that had been churning with pain suddenly went very, very calm. With methodical precision, the kind I used to bring in difficult clients, I forwarded the entire email thread to my personal account. Then I meticulously deleted the forwarded email from the sent folder on his tablet. That night, I waited until Ethan was asleep before getting up. The house was utterly silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning and Ethan's soft breathing. I took his tablet again and began a systematic search through his digital life. I found a second email account I'd never known about. The password took me longer this time, but eventually, I tried Olivia Forever, his college girlfriend's name. It opened. This account contained even more incriminating communications, particularly with his father, about the company's financial structures. I discovered detailed plans to restructure Hayes Marketing before the international expansion, creating a new parent entity where my ownership shares, the small percentage I had invested and legally owned, would be significantly diluted. There were discussions about performance issues they were documenting against me, all fabricated, to justify removing me from leadership once the expansion was complete. It was a complete blueprint for my professional erasure. But the most devastating discovery was an email exchange with his assistant, Sarah. It wasn't just professional. They had been having an affair for at least a year. There were intimate messages, detailed plans for their business trips that were clearly thinly veiled romantic getaways, and even discussions about their future together once Ethan handled his situation at home. I sat in our home office until dawn broke, methodically going through every email, every attachment, every single betrayal. I downloaded everything to a secure cloud account, making multiple backups. By morning, I had a complete, undeniable picture of the extent to which my husband, his family, and even the company I worked for had been conspiring against me. I've never been one to break down in crisis. Growing up the way I did, you learn to save your tears for later and deal with what's in front of you. That morning, as I heard Ethan stirring upstairs, I made a decision. They had made me invisible. Now I would use that invisibility as my power. If you've ever felt your trust completely shattered by the people closest to you, you know that moment when the pain transforms into a strange kind of clarity. Everything suddenly makes sense. All the small inconsistencies, the dismissive comments, the exclusions that you'd rationalized away, the little voice in your head you'd silenced, telling you something was wrong. In that moment, you have a choice: remain the victim they've cast you as, or rewrite the story entirely. I chose the latter. They thought I was just Ethan's shadow. They would soon learn that shadows can grow very dark indeed when the light is extinguished. I've always been methodical. It's what made me good at my job, despite the Hayes family's efforts to undermine me. Now I applied that same methodical approach to my exit strategy. I would need 3 months to execute everything perfectly. 3 months during which I would continue to play the role of the beautiful, oblivious wife and employee. The very next day after discovering the emails, I made an appointment with Rebecca Maxwell, a divorce attorney known for handling high-profile splits involving significant business assets. I paid her retainer in cash from my personal savings, money I'd quietly built up over the years from my independent freelancing work, stashed away in an account they didn't know about. The challenge here, Lily, Rebecca explained in our initial consultation, her expression serious, will be documenting the financial misconduct while protecting your interests in the company. These types of cases can get very messy, very fast. I handed her a flash drive. I've already started, I assured her. Her eyebrows rose as she reviewed the files. This is unusually thorough. Most clients don't come in with this level of preparation. I'm just getting started, I told her, my voice calm and steady. Over the following weeks, I meticulously created a comprehensive record of my contributions to Hayes marketing. I saved every email from clients praising my work, meticulously documenting instances where my ideas had been implemented under Ethan's name. I recovered presentations I had created, slide by agonizing slide, that Ethan had presented as his own. But most importantly, and most chillingly, I began quietly copying evidence of financial irregularities I discovered while exploring Ethan's hidden communications. Richard Hayes, for all his legal knowledge and public reputation, had been playing fast and loose with company accounting for years. There were questionable tax deductions, misleading statements to investors, and a pattern of financial reporting that walked a fine line between creative accounting and outright fraud. It wasn't just sloppy, it was deliberate, designed to inflate numbers and mislead. Then I discovered something that made my blood run cold, something far more sinister than corporate fraud. Tucked away in a deeply password-protected folder, I found a scanned letter dated 20 years prior. It revealed that when Richard was still a practicing judge, he had buried evidence in a case involving one of his closest college friends. The friend's company had knowingly released a product with safety defects that resulted in a child's tragic death. Richard, using his position and influence, had ensured the case was dismissed on technical grounds, denying the grieving family their rightful justice. And in return, Richard had later received a very generous loan from his friend, a sum that was never repaid, quietly channeled through offshore accounts. Richard had kept this letter as insurance against his friend, a secret weapon. Now it would serve as my insurance against Richard. It was a nauseating realization, but it solidified my resolve. These people weren't just dismissive, they were rotten to the core. Meanwhile, I began establishing my own financial independence with the same methodical precision. I opened new accounts at a bank the Hayes family didn't use, one that was completely separate from any of their financial networks. I transferred small amounts regularly from my personal savings to avoid triggering any alerts, building up a substantial nest egg. I sold jewelry Ethan had given me, pieces I had never particularly liked anyway, flashy and ostentatious, more for show than for sentiment, and converted the proceeds to cash. I reached out to my brother David in Atlanta. We had drifted apart after my marriage, partly because the Hayes had subtly discouraged me from maintaining close ties with my simple family. David was surprised but immediately supportive. I never liked them, Lil, he admitted during our phone call. But I figured you knew what you were doing. You're smart. I didn't, I said honestly, a lump forming in my throat. But I do now. David immediately offered his guest room for as long as I needed it. He also put me in touch with a former college friend who owned a marketing firm in Atlanta, Horizon Marketing, and was looking to expand their team. By the end of the second month, I had secured an apartment in Atlanta under my maiden name, lined up preliminary interviews with 3 marketing firms, and prepared a comprehensive file for the Securities and Exchange Commission, detailing Hayes Marketing's financial irregularities. I also began moving my personal belongings out of the house in small, undetectable batches. Photo albums from before my marriage, the few family heirlooms I had managed to keep. Books, clothes Ethan never noticed I wore, because they weren't designer labels. I stored them temporarily at a small storage unit, paid for in cash. Each item removed was a tiny act of rebellion, a small piece of my authentic self reclaimed. The hardest part was maintaining the facade at work and at home. I smiled through family dinners, nodding at Ethan's self-aggrandizing stories about the Kaido Systems deal. I pretended not to notice when he came home, late smelling of Sarah's distinctive, cloying perfume. At the office, I diligently worked on the Sterling Holdings account rebrand, knowing it was busy work designed to sideline me. I even attended a charity luncheon with Eleanor where she spent 2 hours criticizing my contributions to the silent auction. "Perhaps next year you could focus on just helping with the setup, dear," she'd suggested, her voice laced with condescension. "The procurement of items requires certain connections, you see." Through it all, I maintained my composure, playing the role they had assigned me, the insignificant, invisible Lily who didn't warrant their concern or attention. What gave me strength during those weeks was knowing what they didn't. I saw everything now, every manipulation, every lie, every betrayal. And for someone supposedly so invisible, I sure knew a lot of their secrets. As my departure date grew closer, I finalized the last details. I scheduled the delivery of my SEC evidence for exactly 1 week after I would be gone, giving myself time to be well established in Atlanta before the storm hit. I prepared emails to Hayes Marketing's key clients, carefully worded to express concerns about the company's stability and financial reporting, setting them to send automatically after my disappearance. These weren't explicit accusations, but rather vague warnings that would trigger questions and audits. I also transferred my personal investment in the company, a significant amount that Ethan had always dismissed as cute that you want to contribute. The withdrawal, though completely legal, would create immediate cash flow issues for the company, especially given their already precarious financial state, which I had uncovered. The night before Ethan was scheduled to leave for a business trip to Chicago, actually a weekend with Sarah at a lakeside resort, according to their emails, I sat across from him at dinner, feeling a strange sense of peace. "Everything okay?" he asked, barely glancing up from his phone. "You're quiet tonight." "Just thinking about the future," I replied, which was entirely true. "Don't worry about the Tokyo expansion," he said, misinterpreting my comment. "Once it's established, we'll be in an even better position. Trust me." I smiled. "I always have." The irony seemed completely lost on him. The morning Ethan left for his business trip with Sarah, he kissed me distractedly on the cheek and reminded me to water the plants on the deck, as if that would be my primary concern while he was gone. I smiled, wished him a productive trip, and watched his car disappear down our tree-lined street. I had already said my silent goodbyes to Hayes Marketing the previous day. I had walked through the offices one last time, nodding to colleagues who had never really seen me. I had touched the conference room table where I had presented countless campaigns, the ones that had been stolen. I had even taken a moment in the small office I had earned through years of hard work, looking at the view of downtown Charlotte that had once symbolized my success, a future that was never truly mine. My last interaction had been with Clara, Mark's wife, who caught me looking wistful as I left the building. "Everything okay, Lily?" she had asked with genuine concern, her eyes kind. For a moment, I had considered confiding in her. Clara had always been kind, always seemed to see me when others looked right through me. But involving her would only complicate her own precarious position in the family, so I demurred. "Just tired," I had replied with a smile. "Have a good weekend." Now, with Ethan gone, I began the final phase of my plan. I moved methodically through our house, collecting only what truly mattered to me, my grandmother's recipes, worn and stained with generations of love, photos from my life before Ethan, before the Hayes family, snapshots of a vibrant, unburdened girl, the first marketing award I had won in college, a small, unassuming trophy that held more pride than any Hayes fortune. I left all the designer clothes, the expensive jewelry, the status symbols that had never really felt like mine. I transferred the last of my documents to Rebecca Maxwell, with explicit instructions. Rebecca had been initially concerned about my approach, seeing it as unconventional, but had come to understand my reasoning. "They won't know what hit them," she had said during our final meeting, a grim smile playing on her lips. "But are you sure this is what you want? We could pursue a more conventional divorce, with significant compensation." "This isn't about money, Rebecca," I had explained, the truth ringing clear. "It's about finally being seen." I scheduled the delivery of my evidence to the SEC for exactly 1 week later, giving me ample time to be well established in Atlanta before the storm broke. I set up the automated emails to key clients, carefully worded to express concern about the company's stability and financial reporting without making actionable allegations that could be legally challenged. The most difficult task was writing the note I would leave for Ethan. I went through dozens of drafts, ranging from pages of detailed grievances to a simple, dismissive goodbye. In the end, I settled on something I knew would haunt him: a direct callback to Victoria's cruel joke. "Now you can see what happens when I disappear." I placed the note on his pillow, a final, poignant touch that would greet him upon his return from his weekend with Sarah. As I carried my 2 suitcases to my car, a profound sense of liberation washed over me. I paused on the front steps of the house I had tried so hard to make a home. The Hayes estate loomed in the distance, visible from our driveway, a constant, imposing reminder of the family I had never truly been part of. I felt no sadness, no regret, just strange, exhilarating lightness. For years, I had contorted myself, shrinking my spirit to fit into spaces far too small. Now, I was reclaiming my full self. The drive to Atlanta took just under 4 hours. I didn't play music or make calls. I simply drove, watching the Carolina landscape give way to Georgia, feeling each mile create distance between myself and the life I was leaving behind. David was waiting for me when I arrived, his familiar face a welcome sight after so many years of limited contact. He helped me with my bags, showed me to his guest room, and then did something that finally made tears spring to my eyes after weeks of stony resolve. He hugged me, a long, warm, comforting embrace, and he said, "Welcome back, Lil. I've missed you." For the first time in years, someone saw me, really saw me, and it was like coming home to myself. That night, as I lay in bed in my brother's guest room, I thought about Ethan returning to an empty house, finding my note, and realizing that his invisible wife had slipped away while he was with his mistress. I imagined his initial confusion turning to panic as he discovered what else had disappeared: the evidence of his family's misconduct, his financial secrets, the carefully constructed narrative of Hayes' superiority. I thought about Victoria's joke at the barbecue and felt a grim satisfaction. They had never noticed me, but they would certainly notice when I was gone. My new life in Atlanta began with a strange sense of calm, a quiet hum of purpose. I rented a modest apartment in Midtown, a place that felt like my own, designed for me, by me. I interviewed with several marketing firms and ultimately accepted a position with Horizon Marketing, where David's friend Marcus was a partner. I explained my situation honestly, that I was leaving a toxic marriage and needed a fresh start. Marcus, a visionary in the industry, valued my portfolio and experience enough to bring me on as a senior account manager. I plunged into my new role, grateful for the opportunity to use my skills without constant undermining. From a safe distance, I watched the Hayes saga unfold through social media, industry news, and occasional updates from Rebecca. The first few days after my departure played out exactly as I had anticipated. Ethan returned from his weekend with Sarah to find an empty house and my cryptic note. According to Rebecca, who received a frantic call from his lawyer, his initial reaction wasn't concern but annoyance. He assumed I was having some kind of emotional episode and would return once I got it out of my system. That delusion changed quickly when he discovered I had withdrawn my investment from the company. Hayes Marketing operated with a surprisingly precarious cash flow despite its prestigious reputation. My withdrawal, completely legal and documented, created an immediate financial crisis, precisely as they were preparing for the Tokyo expansion. 3 days after I left, the automated emails to key clients were sent. They were carefully worded, expressing my personal concerns about recent observations regarding financial stability and ethical reporting practices, without making specific actionable allegations that could be considered defamatory. Coming from me, someone clients trusted and had worked with directly for years, these vague warnings were enough to cause serious concern. By the end of the first week, 2 major clients had put their contracts on hold, pending clarification of certain financial matters. Ethan and Richard were scrambling to reassure everyone while simultaneously trying to locate me. Rebecca forwarded me an email from Ethan's lawyer. Mr. Hayes is extremely concerned about his wife's mental health and well-being. Her actions are completely out of character and potentially self-destructive. He merely wishes to ensure her safety and provide any necessary support. I laughed out loud when I read it. Even now, they were trying to control the narrative, casting me as unstable rather than acknowledging their own misconduct. The real chaos began when my SEC file was delivered. Within days, Hayes Marketing was under preliminary investigation. All international expansion plans, including the much-vaunted Kito Systems deal, were immediately frozen. The company's assets were placed under intense scrutiny, and Richard's creative accounting practices were exposed to unwelcome official attention. I followed the unfolding drama on social media with a detached, almost academic interest. Victoria's Instagram, once a carefully curated showcase of Hayes' privilege, became increasingly frantic. Her posts shifted from designer outfits and exotic vacations to vague references about standing by family in difficult times. And the truth will prevail. One particular post caught my attention. A throwback photo of her and Ethan as children, with the caption, "Blood is thicker than water. Some people will never understand family loyalty." The irony was almost too perfect. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding my life, brick by brick. I reconnected with college friends I had lost touch with during my Hayes years. I joined a book club, took up hiking in the North Georgia mountains, rediscovering a love for nature I'd suppressed. I even started dating casually, nothing serious, but enough to remind myself that I was desirable and interesting in my own right, outside the shadow of Ethan or his family. At Horizon Marketing, I quickly established myself as a valuable team member, my confidence and creativity flourishing without the constant undermining I'd endured. Within 2 months, I had brought in 2 new clients and was leading a successful campaign for a regional healthcare provider. Throughout this period, Ethan's attempts to contact me grew increasingly desperate. He progressed from annoyed to angry to pleading. His texts and emails, which I never responded to directly, but Rebecca monitored, evolved from "This childish behavior needs to stop immediately, Lily," to "Please, Mel, we need to talk. I don't understand what's happening." By the 3rd month, the Hayes family was in full crisis mode. The SEC investigation had expanded to include Richard's judicial misconduct. An enterprising financial journalist had picked up the story, publishing a detailed exposé of the Hayes empire's questionable foundations. The family home, the site of that fateful 4th of July barbecue, was put on the market to cover mounting legal fees. The most unexpected development came when Clara, Mark's wife, reached out to me directly. Unlike the other Hayes family members, she didn't demand explanations or hurl accusations. Her email was simple and direct. "Lily, I don't blame you for leaving. I've often thought about doing the same. Would it be possible to talk?" I hesitated, but eventually agreed to a phone call. Clara revealed that the Hayes facade was crumbling completely. Mark was drinking heavily. Richard had suffered a minor heart attack after being served with investigation papers. And Eleanor was frantically trying to maintain social connections that were rapidly abandoning the family. "Victoria's the worst," Clara confided, her voice weary. "She's convinced you orchestrated this whole thing as some kind of revenge for her joke at the barbecue." I couldn't help but laugh. "It wasn't the joke, Clara," I explained. "It was the truth behind it. It was the realization that I was invisible, and they made me that way." "I know," Clara said quietly. "I always saw how they treated you. I should have said something. We all make our choices," I replied without bitterness. As the 3-month mark of my disappearance approached, I felt mixed emotions. There was a profound satisfaction in seeing the Hayes family face consequences for their actions, for the years of emotional abuse and manipulation. But there was also a strange grief for what might have been, for the dream of a loving marriage and an accepting family if Ethan had truly been the man I thought I had married. There was freedom in my new life, but also occasional moments of doubt and loneliness, the echoes of old insecurities. What I never felt, however, was regret. I had reclaimed myself from invisibility. I had refused to remain a shadow. Whatever came next would be on my terms, in a world where I was fully seen. What I didn't expect was that Ethan would track me down, but he did, showing up unannounced at my office in Atlanta exactly 3 months after I had walked away from our life together. His appearance would force a confrontation I hadn't planned for, but perhaps needed. to truly close this chapter of my life. I was reviewing a campaign proposal when my assistant knocked on my office door. "Lily, there's an Ethan Hayes here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's insisting it's urgent." My heart stuttered for a moment, then resumed at a faster, stronger pace. I had known this moment might come, but facing it was another matter entirely. "Give me 5 minutes, then send him in," I replied, keeping my voice steady, betraying none of the tremor I felt deep inside. I used those 5 minutes to center myself. I straightened my desk, a small ritual to ground me. I checked my appearance in my compact mirror, not out of vanity, but to see the new Lily staring back. I took several deep breaths, inhaling calm, exhaling the past. This wasn't the Melanie who had shrunk herself to fit into the Hayes world. This was the new Lily, confident, independent, and completely visible. When Ethan walked in, I barely recognized him. The polished, confident man I had married looked haggard and disheveled. His normally impeccable clothes were wrinkled. His hair needed cutting, and there were deep, dark circles under his eyes. For a fleeting moment, I felt a flicker of the old connection, an instinct to comfort him that I immediately suppressed. That person, that instinct, was gone. "Lily," he said, his voice cracking slightly, raw with exhaustion. "You're really here." "I am," I replied calmly, my voice steady, betraying nothing. "How did you find me?" "It wasn't easy," he admitted, remaining standing even though I had gestured to a chair. "You covered your tracks well, but eventually I remembered your brother lived in Atlanta. From there, it was just a matter of checking marketing firms until I found you." I nodded. It was a reasonable approach, one I had known was possible, but considered unlikely, given Ethan's tendency to delegate difficult tasks. "Why are you here, Ethan?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I remembered well. "Why am I here? Are you serious? You disappeared. You took money from the company. You sent those emails to our clients. The SEC is investigating my father. Our entire life has fallen apart, and you're asking why I'm here." "Our life?" I repeated quietly, a faint, almost imperceptible curve on my lips. Was it ever really our life, Ethan? Or was it your life that I was permitted to orbit around? As long as I stayed in my designated place. As long as I remained unseen? He looked genuinely confused, his brow furrowed. "What are you talking about? We had everything. A beautiful home, successful careers, respect in the community." "You had those things," I corrected him, cutting through his self-pity. "I had the illusion of them, an illusion contingent on my continued invisibility." I gestured to the chair again, more firmly this time. "Sit down, Ethan. If we're going to have this conversation, let's have it properly." To my mild surprise, he complied, sinking into the chair as if his legs could no longer hold him. Up close, he looked even worse, defeated in a way I had never seen before. A part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, felt a sharp satisfaction at this visible evidence of his suffering. "Everything's gone," he said, his voice hollow, barely a whisper. "The company is under SEC investigation. We've had to sell the house. Dad's in the hospital, a heart attack last week. His reputation is ruined because of that old case you somehow found. Mom's a mess, even Victoria." He trailed off, his gaze drifting. "What about Victoria?" I prompted, curious despite myself. "She sent you an email, didn't she?" he asked, his voice laced with accusation. "Threatening you?" I nodded. Victoria had indeed sent a lengthy, vitriolic email accusing me of destroying the family out of jealousy packed with vague but ominous consequences. I had forwarded it directly to Rebecca Maxwell, who had reported it to the police as a precaution. "She's facing potential charges for that," Ethan said, shaking his head. "Harassment, threats, on top of everything else." He looked up at me, his expression shifting from defeat to anger. "Was this what you wanted, Lily, to destroy everyone?" "No," I said honestly, meeting his gaze directly. "I didn't want to destroy anyone. I simply wanted to be seen, to be valued, to be treated as an equal partner in our marriage and our business. When I discovered that was never going to happen, that in fact, you and your family were actively working against me, conspiring to erase me, I chose to leave. I chose myself." "Those emails were private," he muttered, almost defensively. "Yes," I agreed, a chilling calm in my voice. "Private conversations about how to manipulate and ultimately remove me from my own life. Private plans to take credit for my work. Private discussions about your affair with Sarah. He flinched visibly at the mention of Sarah, a raw, exposed nerve. That wasn't serious. It was just... Please don't insult my intelligence, I interrupted, my voice sharp, brooking no argument. Not anymore. We're beyond that now. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of years of deception and disappointment hanging heavy between us. Finally, Ethan spoke again, his voice quieter, almost pleading. I didn't come here to fight, Lily. I came because I need to understand. How did we get here? When did you change? The question was so typically Ethan, centered on his perception, his experience, that I almost laughed, a dry, humorless sound. I didn't change, Ethan. I woke up. There's a difference. I pulled a folder from my desk drawer and slid it across to him. These are divorce papers. Rebecca has been in contact with your lawyer for weeks. Everything is fair. I'm not asking for ongoing support or additional compensation beyond what was legally mine to begin with. I simply want a clean break, a complete separation from your family and your world. He stared at the folder without opening it. Is there any way we could try again? Start over somehow? I know I made mistakes, but... Ethan, I cut him off gently, my voice firm but without anger. The woman you want to start over with doesn't exist anymore. She was a creation, partly yours, partly mine, partly your family's. The real me is sitting across from you now, and she isn't going back to being invisible, not for anyone. I loved you, he said, and for the first time, I thought I detected a hint of genuine emotion, a flicker of something real in his defeated eyes. Perhaps, I acknowledged, allowing myself a moment of painful honesty. But you loved a version of me that fit conveniently into your world. You never saw all of me. You never wanted to. He opened the folder slowly, glancing through the documents inside, his shoulders slumping. You were planning this for months? He asked, his voice barely audible. Yes. You recorded everything? Copied emails? Gathered evidence? Yes. He looked up at me, a new expression in his eyes, something like grudging respect, mixed with undeniable fear. I never knew you could be so calculating. You never really knew me at all, I replied simply. That was the problem. Ethan sat back in his chair, studying me as if seeing me for the first time. Victoria's joke at the barbecue. That's what triggered all this, isn't it? I shook my head. It wasn't the joke, Ethan. It was everyone's reaction to it. It was your reaction, Ethan. You laughed. You patted her arm like she'd said something clever, instead of cruel. In that moment, I saw the truth about my place in your family. I saw that it didn't exist. It was just a stupid joke, he protested weakly, trying to cling to a shred of normalcy. No, I said firmly, my voice unwavering. It was the truth. If I disappeared, no one would notice. So I decided to test that theory. His expression darkened, a flash of the old arrogance trying to surface. We noticed, Lily. The whole world noticed. Look at what's happened. You didn't notice me disappearing, I clarified, emphasizing each word. You noticed the consequences of my disappearance. There's a difference. We lapsed into silence again. Outside my office window, Atlanta traffic moved steadily along Peachtree Street. My new life continued, vibrant and real, even as I sat facing the ghost of my old one. Finally, Ethan picked up the divorce papers. I'll have these reviewed and signed, he said, his voice flat with resignation. Thank you, I nodded. He stood to leave, then paused at the door, his hand on the frame. I was angry when I found out what you'd done, he said, almost to himself. Furious, actually. I wanted to hate you for destroying everything. He shook his head slowly, a dawning realization in his eyes. But then I realized something. You were right about one thing, Lily. You were invisible. That's why none of us saw you coming. With that, he was gone, leaving me alone with the strange feeling that, for the first time in our entire relationship, Ethan had actually seen me clearly. 1 year later, I stood on the rooftop deck of my new condo in Midtown Atlanta, watching the sunset paint the skyline in shades of gold and pink. Music and laughter drifted up from the gathering I was hosting below. A combination 4th of July celebration and a 1-year anniversary of my freedom. Horizon Marketing had promoted me to partner 6 months earlier, after my work with regional healthcare providers expanded into a national campaign that garnered industry awards. I had my own team now, young marketers I mentored with an emphasis on recognition and credit for their contributions. No one on my team would ever have their ideas stolen or their hard work erased. My personal life had blossomed as well. I reconnected with my family, spending holidays in Tennessee for the first time in years. My brother David and I had weekly dinner dates where we made up for lost time, sharing stories, laughter, and sometimes quiet tears for the years we'd missed. I had even started seeing someone, a literature professor named Benjamin. He was kind, brilliant, and most importantly, he saw and appreciated me exactly as I was, without pretense or expectation. The divorce had been finalized without drama. Ethan had signed the papers and respected my wishes for no further contact. Hayes Marketing had eventually been sold to a larger agency after the SEC investigation resulted in substantial fines, but no criminal charges against Richard. Richard had recovered from his heart attack, but retired from public life entirely, his reputation in tatters. Victoria's harassment charges had been reduced to a warning after she agreed to leave the state. Last I heard, she was trying to rebuild her life on the West Coast, far from the Charlotte society that had once defined her. The most surprising and wonderful development had been my friendship with Clara. After that initial phone call, we had stayed in touch, her quiet kindness a balm to my still healing heart. When she finally left Mark 6 months after my departure, unable to bear the Hayes family's crumbling facade and Mark's spiraling alcoholism, I had helped her find an apartment in Atlanta and introduced her to my growing circle of friends. She blossomed here too, finding a new purpose teaching art history at a local university. "There you are," Clara's voice broke into my thoughts as she joined me on the rooftop deck, a glass of sparkling cider in her hand. "Everyone's looking for you downstairs. Benjamin's telling that hilarious story about his disastrous first lecture again." I smiled. "I'll be down in a minute. Just wanted a moment to take it all in." Clara nodded understandingly, leaning against the railing beside me. "1 year," she mused, her voice soft. "Hard to believe so much has changed." "Do you regret it?" I asked, looking out at the city lights. "Leaving?" She shook her head decisively. "Not for a second. Best decision I ever made. Second only to your decision, which gave me the courage to make mine." We stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights begin to twinkle as dusk deepened. "Oh, I almost forgot to tell you," Clara said suddenly, turning to me. "I ran into Eleanor yesterday." My attention snapped back to her. "Eleanor Hayes, here in Atlanta?" Clara nodded. "At Lenox Mall. She's working at the Nordstrom perfume counter, apparently." With everything that happened, their savings were mostly wiped out. I tried to imagine proud perfectionist Eleanor Hayes, spritzing perfume on strangers for commission. It was difficult to reconcile with the woman who had scrutinized my table settings and dismissed my grandmother's pie. "She didn't recognize me at first," Clara continued. "I think she's trained herself not to see people from before. Then she did. She looked like she wanted to disappear. Then she saw you weren't with me and got this look of relief that quickly turned to panic when she realized I might tell you I'd seen her." "What did you say to her?" I asked, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. Clara smiled slightly, a knowing, almost mischievous glint in her eyes. "Nothing much, just that I was doing well, living in Atlanta now. She asked very reluctantly if I ever saw you. I said yes, that you were thriving. Partner at a successful firm, happy, surrounded by people who value you." "And how did she respond to that?" "She didn't really," Clara said, shaking her head. "Just got this faraway look and said, 'I always told Richard that girl would land on her feet.' As if she'd been your champion all along. The capacity for self-deception in that family is truly remarkable." I laughed softly. "Indeed it is." We were interrupted by Benjamin calling up from the stairwell. "Lily, are you up here? We're about to start the fireworks." "Coming," I called back. Clara touched my arm before we headed downstairs. "You know, there's something I never told you," she said, her voice softer now, reflective. "At that barbecue, after Victoria made that awful joke and you left the table, I confronted Ethan." My eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You did? What did he say?" "He said I was overreacting, that you were fine, that you knew it was just Victoria being Victoria." She shook her head, a hint of sadness in her eyes. I remember thinking, he doesn't see her at all. And the sad thing was, neither did I. Not really. None of us saw the strength you had inside you. As we rejoined the party, I was struck by the profound contrast between this 4th of July and the one a year ago. Then I had been surrounded by people who looked through me, made me feel transparent. Now I was encircled by friends and loved ones who truly saw me, my talents, my quirks, my full, authentic self. Benjamin slipped his arm around my waist as we gathered on the balcony for the fireworks. "Everything okay?" he murmured, sensing my contemplative mood. "You seem deep in thought up there." "Everything's perfect," I assured him, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. As the first fireworks exploded across the Atlanta sky, painting the night with bursts of color, I reflected on visibility, what it means to be truly seen, to be valued, to occupy space unapologetically in the world. The Hayes family had tried to make me invisible, but in doing so, they had given me the ultimate power. I had seen them clearly, their flaws, their secrets, their rotten core, while remaining unseen myself. In the end, Victoria's cruel joke had contained an unintended truth. If I disappeared, no one in that family would notice, not because I didn't matter, but because they had never actually seen me in the first place. Their loss, as it turned out, not mine. The spectators around me gasped, as a particularly spectacular burst of color filled the sky. I joined them, no longer a shadow at the edges of someone else's life, but fully present in my own. Have you ever had to remake yourself after being invisible for too long? Sometimes the people who should see us most clearly, family, partners, close friends, are the ones who see only what they want to see, a distorted reflection that serves their own narrative. My journey from invisibility to living fully seen taught me that true visibility starts with seeing yourself clearly first. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family dynamics or reclaiming your power. Drop a comment below about a time you had to stand up for yourself in a family situation. And if you want more stories about finding justice and rebuilding after family betrayal, please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button. Remember, the people who truly belong in your life are the ones who see you completely and love what they see.